Some animals are so small that all of their cells are in direct contact with the environment. Diffusion and active transport across cell membranes supply their cells with oxygen and nutrients and remove waste products. The human body, however, contains millions of cells that are not in direct contact with the external environment. Because of this, humans need a circulatory system. The circulatory system transports oxygen, nutrients, and other substances throughout the body and removes wastes from tissue. Blood is pumped throughout the body by the heart, a hollow organ composed almost entirely of muscle. An adult's heart contracts on average 72 times a minute, pumping about 70 milliliters of blood with each contraction. The heart is divided into 4 chambers. A wall called the septum separates the right side of the heart from the left side. The septum prevents oxygen-poor and oxygen-rich blood from mixing. On each side of the septum is an upper and lower chamber. Each upper chamber, or atrium, receives blood from the body. The right atrium accepts oxygen-poor blood from the body, while the left atrium accepts oxygen-rich blood from the lungs. Each lower chamber, or ventricle, pumps blood out of the heart. The right ventricle pumps oxygen-poor blood to the lungs, while the left ventricle pumps oxygen-rich blood to the body. Valves in the heart prevent blood from flowing in the wrong direction. The superior and inferior vena cava bring blood from the body to the heart. Blood leaves the heart through the pulmonary arteries. Once the blood is oxygenated, the blood returns from the lungs through the pulmonary veins. Finally, the oxygenated blood is sent to the rest of the body through the aorta. The heart functions as 2 pumps. One pump pushes blood to the lungs, while the other pump pushes blood to the rest of the body. The right side of the heart pumps oxygen-poor blood from the heart to the lungs through the pulmonary circulation. In the lungs, carbon dioxide diffuses from the blood and oxygen is absorbed. Oxygen-rich blood then flows to the left side of the heart. The left side of the heart pumps oxygen-rich blood to the rest of the body through the systemic circulation. Cells absorb much of the oxygen and load the blood with carbon dioxide by the time it returns to the heart. How is pulmonary circulation different from systemic circulation? Pulmonary circulation is the blood flow between the lungs and the heart. Systemic circulation is the blood flow between the heart and the body. In pulmonary circulation, through which organs does the blood flow? It flows through the heart and lungs. What happens to blood in the capillaries of the lungs? The blood absorbs oxygen and gives off carbon dioxide. What structures does blood flowing through the systemic pathway serve? It serves the rest of the body. Blood leaving the heart passes through the aorta, the first of a series of vessels that carries blood through the systemic circulation. As blood flows through the circulatory system, it moves through 3 types of blood vessels: arteries, capillaries, and veins. Arteries are large vessels that carry blood from the heart to the tissues of the body. Except for the pulmonary arteries, all arteries carry oxygen-rich blood. Arteries have thick, elastic walls. The smallest blood vessels are the capillaries. Most capillaries are so narrow that blood cells pass through them in single file. Their thin walls allow oxygen and nutrients to diffuse from blood into tissues and allow carbon dioxide and other waste products to move from tissues into the blood. After blood passes through the capillaries, it returns to the heart through veins. Many veins are located near and between skeletal muscles. When you move, the contracting skeletal muscles squeeze the veins, pushing blood towards the heart. Many veins contain valves, which ensure blood flows in one direction through these vessels. How are the structures of veins and arteries similar? Veins and arteries have an inner layer of endothelium, a middle layer of smooth muscle, and an outer layer of connective tissue. How do the functions of arteries and veins differ? Most arteries carry oxygen-rich blood from the heart to the tissues of the body. Most veins carry oxygen-poor blood from the body back to the heart. How are capillaries similar to veins and arteries? Capillaries, veins, and arteries all carry blood. Why do diffusion of materials between blood and body cells occur across capillary walls, but not across veins or arteries? because the capillaries have extremely thin walls. In addition to serving as the body's transportation system, components of blood also help regulate body temperature, fight infection, and produce clots to minimize the loss of body fluid from wounds. The human body contains 4 to 6 liters of blood. About 55% of total blood volume is a fluid called plasma. Plasma is about 90% water and 10% dissolved gases, salts, nutrients, enzymes, hormones, waste products, plasma proteins, cholesterol, and other compounds. Plasma proteins consist of 3 types: albumin, globulins, and fibrinogen. Albumin and globulins transport substances such as fatty acids, hormones, and vitamins. Albumin also plays an important role in regulating osmotic pressure. Some globulins fight viral and bacterial infections. Fibrinogen is necessary for blood to clot. Most numerous cells in the blood are red blood cells, or erythrocytes. The main function of red blood cells is to transport oxygen. They get their crimson color from the iron in hemoglobin, a protein that binds oxygen. Red blood cells are produced by cells in the bone marrow. As they mature and fill with hemoglobin, nuclei and other organelles are forced out. White blood cells, leukocytes, are the army of the circulatory system. White blood cells guard against infection, fight parasites, and attack bacteria. A sudden increase in white blood cells is a sign that the body is fighting a serious infection. Different types of white blood cells perform different protective functions. For example, macrophages engulf pathogens. Lymphocytes are involved in immune response. B lymphocytes produce antibodies that fight infection and provide immunity. T lymphocytes help fight tumors and viruses. In a healthy person, white blood cells are outnumbered by red blood cells by almost 1,000 to 1. A minor cut or scrape may bleed for a bit, but then the bleeding stops. Why? Because blood can clot. Blood clotting is made possible by plasma proteins and cell fragments called platelets. When platelets come in contact with the edges of a broken blood vessel, their surfaces become sticky and they release proteins called clotting factors that start reactions to produce a solid clot. In this example, a blood vessel is injured by a cut or scrape. Platelets clump at the site and release the clotting factor thromboplastin, which triggers a series of reactions. Thromboplastin converts the protein prothrombin into the enzyme thrombin. Thrombin converts the soluble plasma protein fibrinogen into insoluble, sticky fibrin filaments, which form the clot. The clot seals the damaged area and prevents further blood loss. As blood passes through capillaries, some blood cells and components of plasma move through capillary walls and into the fluid between cells. Each day, about 3 liters of fluid leaves the blood in this way. Most of the fluid, known as lymph, is reabsorbed into capillaries, but not all of it. The rest go into the lymphatic system. The lymphatic system is a network of vessels, nodes, and organs that collects the lymph that leaves capillaries, screens it for microorganisms, and returns it to the circulatory system. Lymph collects in a system of lymphatic capillaries that slowly conducts it into larger lymph vessels. Pressure on lymph vessels from surrounding skeletal muscles help move lymph through the system into larger and larger ducts. Lymph vessels have valves similar to the valves in large veins that prevent lymph from flowing backwards. These ducts return lymph to the blood through openings in veins just below the shoulders. When injury or disease blocks lymphatic vessels, lymph can accumulate in tissues, causing swelling called edema. The lymphatic system also plays an important role in the absorption of nutrients. A system of lymph vessels runs alongside the intestines. The vessels pick up fats and fat-soluble vitamins from the digestive tract and transports these nutrients into the bloodstream. Hundreds of small, bean-shaped enlargements called lymph nodes are scattered along lymph vessels throughout the body. Lymph nodes act as filters, trapping microorganisms, stray cancer cells, and debris. White blood cells inside lymph nodes destroy this cellular trash. When large numbers of microorganisms are trapped in lymph nodes, the nodes become enlarged. The thymus and spleen also play important roles in the immune functions of the lymphatic system. T lymphocytes mature in the thymus before they can function in the immune system. The functions of the spleen are similar to those of lymph nodes. However, instead of lymph, blood flows through the spleen, where it is cleansed of microorganisms and other debris. The spleen also removes old or damaged blood cells and stores platelets. How is the location of lymph nodes and lymph vessels throughout the body related to the role of lymphatic system in circulation? The lymph can be collected throughout the body and returned to the circulatory system. For multicellular organisms, respiration means the process of gas exchange with the environment. The respiratory system picks up oxygen from the air we inhale and releases carbon dioxide as we exhale. With each breath, air enters the body through the air passageways and fills the lungs, where gas exchange takes place, passing oxygen to the circulatory system. The respiratory system consists of the nose, pharynx, larynx, trachea, bronchi, and lungs. As air enters, the lining of the nose starts the filtering process by trapping large particles. Incoming air is warmed in the intranasal cavity and sinuses. These areas produce mucus that moistens the air and catches even more dust particles. Air then moves from the nose to a cavity at the back of the mouth called the pharynx, or throat, and then into the trachea, or windpipe. A flap of tissue called the epiglottis covers the entrance to the trachea, ensuring that food or liquid goes into the esophagus instead. Between the pharynx and the trachea is the larynx, which contains two highly elastic folds of tissue known as the vocal cords. Your ability to speak, shout, and sing comes from these tissues. Mucus produced in the trachea traps inhaled particles, which cilia then sweep away from the lungs towards the pharynx. From the trachea, air moves into two large tubes called bronchi, leading to the lungs. These tubes divide into smaller bronchi, then even into smaller bronchioles. Bronchi and bronchioles are surrounded by smooth muscles that regulate the size of air passageways. The bronchioles lead to millions of tiny air sacs called alveoli. Alveoli are grouped into clusters like bunches of grapes. A delicate network of capillaries surround alveoli. As air enters the alveoli, oxygen dissolves in their moist surfaces and diffuses across thin capillary walls into the blood. Meanwhile, carbon dioxide diffuses in the opposite direction. When you inhale, a muscle called the diaphragm contracts and flattens, creating a partial vacuum inside the tightly sealed chest cavity. Atmospheric pressure does the rest, filling the lungs as air rushes into the breathing passages. Diffusion of oxygen from alveoli into capillaries is a passive process, but hemoglobin in red blood cells actively binds oxygen, increasing the blood's oxygen-carrying capacity more than 60 times. Most carbon dioxide enters red blood cells and combines with water, forming carbonic acid. The rest of it dissolves in plasma or binds to hemoglobin and proteins in plasma. There are no muscles in our lungs or connected directly to them that participate in breathing. The force that drives air into lungs comes from ordinary air pressure, the diaphragm, and muscles associated with the ribs. Movement of the diaphragm and rib cage change air pressure in the chest cavity during inhalation and exhalation. You can control your breathing almost any time you want, to blow up a balloon or to play a trumpet, but this doesn't mean that breathing is purely voluntary. Your nervous system has final control of your breathing muscles, whether you're conscious or not. This is why people who drown have water in their lungs. When they lose consciousness, they breathe water into their lungs. Breathing is initiated by the breathing center in the part of the brainstem called the medulla oblongata. Sensory neurons in or near the medulla and in some large blood vessels gather information about carbon dioxide levels in the body and send the information to the breathing center. When stimulated, the breathing center sends nerve impulses that cause the diaphragm and chest muscles to contract, bringing air into the lungs. The higher the blood carbon dioxide level, the stronger the impulses. If the blood carbon dioxide level reaches a critical point, the impulses become so powerful that you cannot keep from breathing.